Nebraska Territory, July 1872. The sun beat down hard on the prairie, but the real heat was in Savannah Rourke's chest as she rode fast and low across the tall grass, dress torn at the hem, bonnet long gone. Her ribs ached from where her uncle had grabbed her, and her thighs burned from riding bareback, but she kept her eyes on the horizon. She was not going back. The arranged marriage to Seth Dwyer was supposed to secure her future, her uncle had said. 20 years older, already with 2 dead wives behind him and a house that smelled like mold and whiskey. Savannah had smiled politely through the dinner, through the handshake, through the "you'll get used to him." But when the papers were signed and the date set, she waited until midnight, packed what she could, and climbed out the window of her uncle's ranch house. Now she was alone on the plains, and the wind was rising. She had no real plan, just away. She had heard stories of women vanishing into the prairie, swallowed up by weather or worse. But she would rather die honest than live as a man's property. By late afternoon, her horse limped, and a storm rolled in from the west. The sky turned slate gray, and thunder growled low like a warning. She spotted a line of cottonwoods in the distance and urged the horse toward them, teeth clenched. She reached the trees just as the rain broke. Cold water soaked her within seconds. She slid off the horse, staggered, and fell to her knees. The tree cover helped little. Lightning flashed, and the world exploded in white. Then movement. She scrambled backward, heart racing. A figure emerged from behind a low ridge, dark against the storm. She blinked rain from her eyes, ready to run. But he stopped a few yards away, hands open, not threatening. He was tall, lithe, and calm, with black hair pulled back tight and a blanket slung over one shoulder. His eyes, steady and unreadable, locked with hers. "Your horse is injured," he said in soft but clear English. Savannah's voice trembled. I do not need help." He looked at her soaked clothes, her cut hand, the horse favoring its front leg. Then back to her. "You do," he said. She hesitated. "You Cheyenne?" He nodded once. "Name is Nokan Mackay." She stared at him, shivering. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you were alone. And you were running." The rain slowed. She dropped her head, fingers digging into wet dirt. "They tried to force me to marry. I did not want him. I ran." He said nothing for a moment. Then he stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Come with me. Just for tonight. There is shelter." Savannah looked up at him, water dripping from her lashes. She could not think straight. But her legs were shaking, and she was cold to the bone. She nodded. He led her to a narrow trail behind the ridge. They walked in silence, her limping horse following. 10 minutes later, they reached a small lean-to built into a rocky hill, half concealed by brush. Inside, it was dry, with a bed of pine needles and a fire pit. Nokan started a fire with practiced hands. He hung a blanket near the flames for her to dry. She watched him move, quiet, deliberate, like he belonged to the land. She had never known a man who did not fill silence with talking. She sat cross-legged near the fire, blanket around her shoulders. "They will come looking for me." He looked up. "Do they know where you went?" "No. I just rode." "Then you are safe for now." She studied him. His face was lean, strong. A scar curved under his left eye, barely visible in the firelight. "Why do you live alone out here?" He poked the fire gently. "I left my band 2 winters ago. Too much blood. Too many wrong paths." She nodded slowly. "I know what that feels like." They sat in quiet after that. The storm passed and the fire warmed her feet. For the first time in days, her heart beat steady. That night, she slept curled near the embers, and he kept watch, sitting outside beneath the stars. By morning, Savannah's horse could not walk. Nokan said nothing, just whistled low, and a second horse came from somewhere beyond the ridge. He handed her the reins. "You will ride this one." She looked at him, unsure. "Where will I go?" Nokan met her eyes. "You stay with me until you decide." Savannah's throat tightened. "Why are you doing this?" His voice was low. "Because no one should be forced. Not you. Not me." They traveled west that day, riding slow. He showed her how to move with the land, how to read the wind and the sky. He never asked more than she offered. But every night when they stopped, he made sure she had warmth, food, and silence enough to think. On the third night, they camped near the edge of the Platte River. Firelight flickered between them. "You do not talk much," she said, watching him carve a small piece of wood. He glanced up. "Words are easy. Actions last longer." She smiled then, small and real. "You are not like other men." He met her eyes. "You are not like other women." Her cheeks warmed. She looked away, but something inside her shifted. That night, she dreamed of her uncle's house burning behind her and Nokan standing between her and the flames. By the sixth day, Savannah no longer counted how far they had gone. She began to feel her lungs open in the open air, her spine straighten. She had been born in Nebraska, but now she felt like she was seeing it for the first time. He showed her places hidden from the world, cool springs, wide overlooks, deer trails through golden grass. And always he was near, never pushing, never far. He taught her how to hold a bow. She laughed when she missed every shot. He never laughed back, only smiled with his eyes, then adjusted her grip gently, his hands steady on hers. "You are strong," he said. "No one has ever told me that before." He looked at her long then, as if seeing something deeper. Then they were blind. That night, she stood close to him by the riverbank. The moonlight caught the side of his face. Her hand brushed his. He reached for her, slow and deliberate, giving her time to pull away. She did not. Their fingers laced. Nothing needed to be said. But the next morning they heard riders in the distance, too many to be passing travelers. Nokan's face darkened. "They are searching." Savannah's heart dropped. "They found me." Nokan led her behind a thicket with the horses, then stood watch. His eyes scanned the horizon. "If they come close," he said, "you ride west. I will lead them off." "No," she said at once. "I will not leave you." He turned, surprised. "I am done running alone," she said. "If I go, you come with me." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. "I swore to protect you," he said. "And I will." She reached up and touched his cheek. "And I trust you." As the sound of hooves drew nearer, they crouched low together, side by side, hearts beating fast but not with fear. With something new. Something steady. Something that felt like love beginning. The riders passed by, dust rising behind them like the wake of a storm. Savannah stayed low behind the scrub, a hand gripping Nokan's arm, the other pressed to the earth as if she could draw steadiness from it. Only when the last hoofbeat faded into the hills did she let her breath go. "They're going south," Nokan said, still watching the horizon. "We'll turn east." Savannah nodded, her mouth dry. "Toward the river towns?" "No. That's where they'll expect you. We'll keep to the breaks. Sparse but quiet." They mounted in silence and began their slow ride through a narrow draw lined with broken rock and scattered coyote bush. The wind had shifted, warmer now, carrying dust and the faint scent of wild onions. Savannah leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowed against the sun, her body adjusting to the rhythm of the horse beneath her. By late afternoon, they reached a half-collapsed homestead tucked between two low hills. The roof had given way to time, but the stone chimney still stood, and the well beside it held water clean enough to drink. Nokan led both horses to the trough and filled it while Savannah stepped inside the ruins. The floor had caved near the back wall, but she found a rusted stove against one corner and, beside it, the remnants of a rocking chair with one arm missing. "Someone lived here long enough to try," she murmured. Nokan stepped in behind her. "A family once. I passed here 3 summers ago." There was a boy with a limp and a mother who grew herbs in rows. Savannah turned toward him. "What happened?" "Same thing that happens often. Drought. Then sickness. They went east. Or died trying." She ran her fingers over the stove's iron edge, then drew back, dust clinging to her fingertips. "You remember them." "I remember everyone who tries." That night, they slept under the open sky, the horses tethered to a low tree, the stars so bright they seemed to hum. Savannah lay on her side, watching the firelight shift across Nokan's face, his features softened by sleep. His rifle lay near his hand, but his body was loose, trusting. She whispered, "Did you ever think you'd have to protect someone like this?" His eyes opened slowly, as if he'd only been half asleep. "Not like this." "Like what?" He rolled his head to face her. "Not someone who looks at me without fear." The wind stirred the grasses around them. Savannah reached across the narrow space and touched his wrist. "You don't scare me, Nokan." He didn't move for a long time. Then he turned his hand over and closed his fingers around hers. They rose early before the light touched the tops of the cottonwoods. Nokan led them along a dry creek, their tracks hidden in the soft dust. Savannah rode with her back straight, her braid tucked into the collar of her shirt. She'd stripped the lace from her sleeves days ago and now wore a man's coat Nokan had scavenged from a long-abandoned trapper's lean-to. It was too large, sleeves rolled twice, but it kept her warm. "Do you believe in luck?" she asked as they passed a cluster of black-eyed Susans blooming against a rock. "No, why not? Luck forgets people like me." "And you?" She looked ahead. "Then what do we believe in?" "Choice." They camped near a narrow spring that night where the water ran cold over smooth stones. Savannah took her shoes off and stepped in, gasping at the chill. "You'll catch death like that," Nokan warned, setting down a bundle of kindling. "I've had it chasing me for years. Might as well let it cool my feet." He watched her, his expression unreadable. She crouched beside the water, cupping it to her face, and when she looked up, he was still watching. "I used to want to be a teacher," she said. "Before my parents died. Before my uncle decided I was something to trade." He crouched beside her. "You still could." "Where?" "Who would trust a woman who ran from her own wedding?" Nokan picked up a flat stone and skimmed it across the water's surface. "Anyone who sees what you've survived." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "And what about you? Will you stay out here forever?" He shrugged. "It's the only place no one owns me." Savannah touched his shoulder. "You don't have to be alone to be free." He turned toward her, his face close. The fire crackled behind them and the spring whispered over pebbles. He leaned forward, slow, giving her the space to move if she chose. She didn't. Their lips touched, tentative at first, then deeper, soft, but certain. When they broke apart, Savannah pressed her forehead to his. "I never wanted to be saved," she whispered. "Only seen." "I see you," he said. They lay beneath the stars again, not speaking. His arm rested behind her head, her fingers curled in the fabric of his shirt. The fire burned low and the night held its breath around them. Tomorrow they would ride east, not toward the towns, but toward the high buttes where the land folded in on itself and the sky stretched wider than anywhere else. They had no map, no promise of safety, only the trail they chose together. But for the first time in her life, Savannah was not afraid of what came next. The wind shifted in the third week, rising dry from the south, curling dust around their boots as they moved through the low hills east of the Niobrara. The sky stretched pale and cloudless, and the grasses had turned brittle beneath the sun. Savannah rode ahead this time, her shoulders drawn back, eyes scanning the land as Nokan pointed out game trails and signs of coyote dens. They had begun to speak less during the day, not from silence but understanding. A flick of her hand, a glance from him, and they adjusted course without words. She had learned to read the land the way he did, not fluently, but enough to follow its rhythm. One afternoon, they came upon an abandoned line shack tucked against a bluff. The roof had held and the walls were thick with mud chinking. A rusted harness hung from a nail near the door, and inside, a small cot and a rickety table leaned in opposite corners. Nokan walked the perimeter, quiet. Savannah waited beside the doorway until he returned. "Someone stayed here through spring," he said. "Maybe longer. Will they come back?" He shook his head. "Not with the tracks gone and the grasses this tall. It's been empty for a while." They stayed 3 nights, resting the horses and gathering wild plums from a thicket downhill. Savannah found a torn journal tucked beneath a floorboard, pages water-streaked but still legible. She read it by firelight, brow furrowed. "He wrote about missing his brother," she said once, eyes still on the page. "Said the land was too wide without someone to speak to." Nokan stirred the embers with a pine branch. "Some men go mad in the quiet." She looked across the shadows at him. "You didn't." "I listened to what the land says back." By the 4th morning, they moved on. The trail narrowed to a cattle path, and they met no one for days. Near sundown, a pair of antelope startled ahead and vanished up a slope. Savannah dismounted without needing to be told and led her horse to water as Nokan crouched near the bank, checking for signs of crossing. His fingers brushed the damp soil and his brow creased. This wasn't here yesterday, he said, pointing to a deep hoof mark. She knelt beside him. Was it shod? Yes. One horse. Moving fast. She stood, brushing her hands clean on her skirt. Could be a trader. His jaw tightened. Could be someone looking. They moved on at a steady pace, no longer lingering at dusk. By the time they reached the pine-covered slopes west of the river breaks, the sky had turned golden with late summer haze. Savannah had begun to sleep with a knife tucked beneath her blanket, though she never reached for it. One evening, as they paused on a ridgeline, she stepped away from the horses and looked out over the red-banded hillsides below. The wind tugged at her braid. I don't think I ever felt quiet before this, she said. Nokan came to stand beside her. Quiet can be a danger too, but it can also be a beginning. He nodded, his gaze steady on the horizon. What will you do when we stop running? I want to learn again, not only survive. I want to grow something. Teach, maybe. If there's a place that would have me. There is. She turned toward him. Where? He looked at her then. Not through her, not around her, but at her, as if seeing the full weight of who she'd become. With me, he said. Her breath caught, not from surprise but from the certainty in his voice. She stepped closer, the last of the sunlight catching the edge of her cheek. You don't owe me anything, Nokan. I don't give what I don't choose. She reached for his hand this time. Their fingers met, laced without hesitation. They descended the ridge in silence. Below, a narrow valley opened wide with cottonwoods and a stream that curved like a ribbon over stone. Nokan led them down into the heart of it where the trees stood tall and the soil smelled rich. This was my uncle's place, he said. He passed it to me before he joined the northern band. I haven't been back till now. The cabin was small, square-cut logs with a stovepipe chimney and a porch sagging at one corner. A corral leaned half-collapsed beside it and the door hung slightly ajar. Savannah stepped through first, brushing cobwebs aside. The scent of smoke lingered faintly in the walls and a pair of moccasins sat neatly beside the hearth. It's still standing, she said. Nokan moved behind her, setting down the packs. It's yours too, if you want it. She turned, her eyes searching his. Are you asking me to stay? I'm asking you to build something with me. She stepped forward, her hand rising to rest against his chest. Then I will. They cleared the dust together that evening, her laughter rising for the first time in weeks as he chased a squirrel from the rafters. She found a small tin of dried sage on a shelf and set it near the window. He straightened the porch post with a length of rope and a block of wood. When night settled, they lay on the floor beside the hearth, their fingers entwined. Savannah traced the edge of his jaw with quiet reverence. I never thought love would feel like this. Like what? He asked, voice low. Like coming home with both hands open. He kissed her then, not with hunger but with the kind of care that steadies a storm. Outside, the trees whispered and the wind moved west. But inside, the cabin held only warmth. By late August, the heat settled deep into the earth and the rhythm of days at the valley cabin began to feel less like hiding and more like beginning. The morning started early, before the sun crested the bluff, with Savannah kneeling in the garden bed she'd cleared behind the house, turning soil with a broken-handled spade. Nokan repaired the corral fence, one rail at a time, using lodgepole pine he cut from the slope above the stream. The place was quiet, but never still. Hawks circled high above, and deer crossed the lower ridge at dusk, their hooves soft on the dry grass. Savannah kept a ledger of their work on scraps of paper she found folded in an old tobacco tin, scribbling dates and notes in the same neat hand she'd once practiced on school slates. One afternoon, she looked up from where she was sorting seeds and saw Nokan standing just beyond the porch watching the tree line. His posture had stiffened slightly, though nothing moved in the woods. She stood and stepped to his side. What is it? He didn't answer at first. Then there's a wind that shouldn't be here yet. Savannah glanced up. The branches overhead were still, though a faint unease crept in under her ribs. Could be nothing, she said. It could. But that evening, Nokan saddled both horses without explaining, and they rode to the ridge above the cabin as the light faded. From up high, the valley stretched gold and green, the stream catching the last of the sky. He scanned the land slowly, then dismounted. Tracks along the far slope. Fresh. She didn't ask how he knew. She'd seen already how he read the land the way others read faces. "Do you think they're yours?" she asked. "No," he said. "They're not Cheyenne. Too heavy. Too wide apart." They sat on the ridge until the moon rose, and when they returned home, he left the rifle propped against the doorframe. The next morning, Savannah found two strangers near the stream, a white man and a boy, no older than 13, both lean and sunburned. They carried no weapons, just a tin pail and a bedroll slung over the man's shoulder. She called out before approaching, and the man raised his hands slowly. "We're passing through," he said, voice hoarse. "Didn't mean to trespass." Nokan appeared behind her, silent as always, but the man did not flinch. "Where are you headed?" Nokan asked. The boy answered, "North. My mama's sister has a place near Hastings." Savannah stepped forward. "You walked." "Wagon broke west of the Lou. We've been on foot near 2 weeks." Nokan looked at the boy's boots, cracked at the toe. "You'll need rest." The man hesitated. "We don't want trouble." "You won't find any here," Savannah said, already turning toward the cabin. "Come on." They stayed 2 nights. The boy, whose name was Eli, helped Nokan patch a stall wall while Savannah boiled potatoes and split what dry beans they had. The man, Robert, spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of loss. On the second evening, Robert sat on the porch edge beside Savannah, watching the sky bleed orange. "My wife died 2 winters back," he said. "Fever took her. Town doctor wouldn't come out that far." Savannah didn't speak, just passed him the last of the coffee. "I tried to keep the farm going," he said, "but the land dried up. Couldn't feed the animals. Then the wagon gave out. That was the last piece." She looked at him, soft but steady. "You kept your son alive. That counts." He nodded, eyes fixed on the treeline. When they left the next morning, Nokan sent them with a sack of cornmeal and a clean waterskin. Eli hugged Savannah without warning, arms tight around her middle, and she rested her hand on the back of his head. "Travel early," Nokan told Robert. "Avoid the open ground after noon." Robert nodded, emotion caught in his throat. He looked once more at the cabin, then at Savannah. "You two built something here." She watched them walk away, dust rising behind their steps. When they were gone, Savannah turned to Nokan. "You didn't even hesitate. They needed help. You always know who does." He looked at her then, expression unreadable. "So do you." Later that day, she found a wooden box tucked beneath the hearthstones, one she hadn't noticed before. Inside were beads, smooth river stones, and a faded strip of red cloth. She brought it out to the porch where Nokan sat, sharpening a draw knife. "Yours." He looked down at the box, then nodded once. "My mother's." Savannah sat beside him, legs folded under her. "She left it. She gave it to me when I left. Said it was for when I remembered who I was." Savannah touched the cloth gently. "And have you?" "I'm learning." Evening came slow, the kind that stretches soft across the land. Savannah braided her hair back with a strip of the red cloth, her fingers careful not to fray it. When she stepped outside again, Nokan stood by the fence, watching the last light fade. She walked up beside him, brushing her hand against his. He didn't look at her, just said, "I've been thinking about building a second room. Maybe a porch roof that doesn't sag." She leaned into his side, the weight of her body easy against his. "Then you'd better plan for a table that seats more than 2. His hand found hers again, fingers rough and sure. "I already have." The first frost came sudden and silver, dusting the cabin roof before dawn and curling the last of the squash leaves into brittle ribbons. Savannah woke early, breath clouding in the cold, and pulled the wool blanket tighter as she sat up. Beside her, Nokan was already lacing his boots, shoulders bare to the chill. "I'll check the traps before the sun's up," he said, voice low so it wouldn't startle her. "Could be rabbits near the stream." "I'll bring in the last onions," she said, rubbing warmth into her hands. "They'll spoil if we wait." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her temple, rough palms bracketing her face for a quiet moment. "Don't stay out too long. Your coat's thin." She smiled into his touch, then rose once he'd gone. The cabin smelled of dry pine and earth, and the coals in the stove still held some heat. She layered her dress with the old wool coat they'd patched together last week, then slipped outside, boots crunching over frost-hardened ground. The garden had faded into stalks and vines, but she worked without complaint, hands red but sure. By the time she carried the onions inside, her fingertips were stiff. She set them in the basket by the window and lit the stove again, coaxing flame from the coals. When Nokan returned just after sunrise, he carried a brace of rabbits and a quiet look in his eyes. "Someone passed through the south fence," he said, setting the animals down. "Boot prints. 2 pair. Walking heavy." Savannah straightened. "Close? 2 ridges over. Not fresh, but not old." She washed her hands at the basin. "Do you think they're just passing?" "They stopped to rest. You can tell when the grass is flattened like that." She dried her hands slowly. "We haven't seen anyone since Robert and Eli." He nodded once. "It might be nothing, but I'll check again tomorrow." She said nothing more, but that night she double-latched the door and Nokan brought in an extra load of wood before dusk. The days shortened. They worked steadily, splitting logs, smoking meat, braiding corn husk dolls to hang near the window as charm against early storms. Savannah began writing letters she never sent, pages folded and tucked in a wooden box beneath the bed. She wrote about quiet mornings, about the way Nokan moved through the world as if listening to something just beyond hearing. She wrote about the first time she laughed without guilt. One afternoon, a wagon wheel creaked down the lower trail. Savannah was kneading dough when she heard it. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her skirt. A man in a faded brown coat sat driving a mule cart. A woman beside him, bonnet pulled low. Their wagon bed held a barrel and a canvas-covered crate. "Morning," the man called. "Didn't expect to find folks up this far." Savannah nodded politely. "We keep to ourselves." "Just passing through," the woman said. "Looking for a place to settle before snow." Nokan stepped out from behind the shed, rifle resting easy at his side. The man raised a hand. "Not looking for trouble. We've got trade if you've got space to talk." Nokan looked to Savannah, and she gave a small nod. Inside, they sat at the table, the woman sipping hot tea while the man unrolled a small cloth bundle of tools. "I mend harness, sharpen blades. My wife spins thread." They left before dusk, trading a spool of thick linen and a whetstone for dried apples and a jar of honey. After the wagon disappeared over the ridge, Savannah leaned against the porch rail and watched the wind tug at the treetops. "They were kind," she said. Nokan nodded. "Not everyone who comes means harm." She turned toward him. "Do you ever think about what this might have looked like if we'd met under other circumstances?" He considered that, then shook his head. "If it had been different, you might not have needed to run, and I might not have learned to make space for someone else." That night, she lay beside him and traced the scar below his eye with the pad of her thumb. "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe," she whispered. His voice was steady. "You are now." Snow came the next week, soft and heavy, blanketing the hills and muffling every sound. They worked indoors, sewing patches on worn coats, boiling root vegetables, reading aloud from a book of sermons Savannah found in the bottom of a trunk. Neither of them spoke about the world beyond the valley. There was no need. When spring returned, it brought birdsong and the scent of thaw. Shoots of green pushed through the soil Savannah had turned with her hands. Nokan rebuilt the porch roof and planted a row of willows near the stream. One evening, as they sat watching the sun slip behind the ridge, he stood and reached into the pocket of his coat. He held out a ring carved from antler, smooth and pale. "I don't have papers," he said, "and I don't need them, but if you want to wear my name, I'd be proud." Savannah took the ring, her fingers trembling slightly. "I already wear your trust," she said, "but I'll wear this too." She pressed it onto her finger, then leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. They were married 3 days later, just the two of them, under the budding cottonwoods. She wore a dress she'd stitched from linen and thread traded long ago, and he wore a shirt she'd mended at the shoulders. There were no vows but the ones spoken quietly, hands clasped, the earth beneath them steady. Years passed. They built a pen for goats, added a second room to the cabin. Savannah taught children from nearby homesteads how to read and write, their parents bringing her eggs or flour in thanks. Nokan carved toys for the little ones who stayed late, his fingers still sure, still quiet. They grew older without growing apart. He lined the windows with cedar to keep the drafts out. She planted blackberries in the hollow near the stream. One warm evening, she stood in the doorway, watching fireflies drift low over the grass. Nokan came to stand behind her, arms folding around her waist. "Do you ever miss what came before?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Not when I have what came after." And they stayed like that, the two of them in the doorway of the home they built, the past behind them, the rest of their days unfolding slow and sure beneath the wide Nebraska sky.